Do not adjust your dials. Don't rub your little eyes too hard. You're not seeing an illusion.
This is the new Give Them an Argument show.
We got the new show starts today. My name is Mark Warren.
I'm Ryan Lake.
I'm not Ben Burgess.
No. If you put us together, we kind of look like Ben Burgess, but we're a little bit. Oh, wait, I got to go this way. Yeah,
a little bit?
Yeah, a little bit.
Ben has given us control of his YouTube channel for the evening. That was a big mistake.
Yeah.
Ryan, even as I'm talking right now, is it changing the password?
Mm-hmm.
We've got a new version of Give Them an Argument that I think you're really going to like.
Yeah, it's going to be a big improvement. Lots
of arguments still.
Yep.
Still a deep hatred of woke culture.
Mm-hmm. That's at the core.
A little bit more emphasis on IQ.
Yeah.
And success.
Yeah. We're here to help people. We're here to help people.
Yeah.
That's what the show has been missing before. We really want to do some good. We want to help people understand IQ and how it helps you with success. How to raise your IQ. Yeah.
Like that. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, so, but I think that it would be really nice if we did say goodbye to.
Noel's right. This is going to be good.
It is going to be good. No. Mm-hmm. We're going to say goodbye to Ben tonight by watching him debate with Ted Cruz's older brother who lives in the woods.
Yeah, something is that right? I thought it was Colonel Sanders, but had time traveled into the present to debate Ben Burgess. But
going under the name of Pastor Doug Wilson.
Mm-hmm.
Doug Wilson's an evangelical theologian pastor at Christ Church in Moscow, Idaho.
He's also a Robert E. Lee sympathizer.
There you go.
You gotta add that to the.
Yes.
Ben, I mean, not
Ben.
Yeah, not Douglas Wilson.
Right. Ben is the Robert E. Lee sympathizer. Yeah.
And they're going to debate about whether or not
God is a condiment. Is that the debate?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And so we'll comment on the debate when it comes up. If it's relevant, we're not going to shoehorn it in. But if issues of IQ or success show up in the debate,
especially anything that suggests a relationship between those two things. Yeah.
Because they're, as you'll see, they are intimately related.
Yeah. Ben, to answer Oliver's question, Ben should be in the chat. We gave internet access to him in his cage. So he should be able to chime in, I believe.
My understanding is that without this YouTube channel as a source of income, he might be moving to OnlyFans.
Yeah.
To supplement his income.
Yeah. Any super chats will still go to Ben. We'll buy him food with the super chat money. So
tonight.
Tonight. Yeah.
And then
after that, it's ours. Yeah. But for tonight, yeah.
Well, okay, Ryan. Do you want to say anything about your qualifications or who you are, or anything like that?
Yeah, I'm an assistant professor of philosophy at Georgia State University. I have a very above average IQ, which is the secret to my success. That's how I have earned this very middle class salary at Georgia State. So lower middle class salary.
Now,
thanks to my high IQ.
Ryan, you work in the field of philosophy. That's correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's one of the most challenging and intellectually stimulating of all of the fields.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Not only does it require a high IQ, but the study of philosophy will greatly increase your IQ. I had an 85 IQ before I started studying philosophy, and I'm up to 105. So
that's great.
Yeah.
That's great. Wow.
Yeah.
That's above average.
Yeah, exactly.
My name is Mark Warren. I am, as chance would have it, also assistant professor of philosophy at Damon College in Buffalo, New York. My field of expertise is metaethics, which I think might come up a little bit tonight.
I think so.
Yeah, so should we just jump in?
Yeah, let's jump on in.
Okay. Go.
Ladies and gentlemen, thrilled to have you here for another epic debate. And want to let you know, if it's your first time here at Modern Day Debate, we are a neutral platform hosting debates on science, religion, and politics. And we want to let you know, no matter what walk of life you are from, folks, we really do hope you feel welcome. We're glad you're here. And also want to let you know, folks, we are thrilled for an upcoming debate as friend Samuel Nassan and other friend of the channel, Matt Dillahunty, will be on debating next month on whether or not Jesus fulfilled prophecy. So that is one you don't want to miss, folks. So hit that subscribe button and that little notification bell to be sure you don't miss it, as it's going to be a good one. And also, folks, really excited, want to remind you, as we have these debates, our goal is to both create a neutral platform, but also we want to encourage you to focus on kind of narrowing in your critiques on the arguments rather than the people. We really do appreciate our guests. We're super thankful that they're with us today. And so please do keep your criticisms aimed at the arguments rather than at the person. And so with that, what we're going to do is introduce our guests and give them a chance. I want to let you know, folks, their links are in the description right now at the very top of the description. So if you want to hear more from our guests during this debate, they're waiting for you right now. You can click on those links in the description box below. So we are thrilled to have our guests, though. And so we want to say thanks so much. We'll start with Doug and just say, Doug, thanks so much. It's a true pleasure to have you back. And if you'd be willing to share what people can expect to find at your links, we're thrilled to have you here.
Okay, well, yeah, thanks for the opportunity. Basically, if you go to dougwills.com, which is my blog and Mablog, on the landing page there, you can find a link or a connection to pretty much everything that I'm involved with. So on the front page of Blog and Mablog, which is dougwills.com, you can connect to New St. Andrews College or Logos School, Christchurch, the whole shoot match.
Absolutely. Well, thanks so much, Doug. We're thrilled to have you back. And Ben, glad to have you back as well. What can people expect to find at your link in the description?
Yeah, so they can find, well, there's a link to my Twitter, and they can find the YouTube channel and podcast that I host, which is called Give Them an Argument, and pretty much everything else, the columns I write for Jacobin and all of that, you can find at benburgess.com.
Absolutely. Well, thanks both gentlemen. This is a true pleasure. So what we're going to do is we're going to jump right into it, folks. And we're going to do basically a pretty, you could say, hybrid format where we do have openings at the start, which would be about 12 minutes. And then we'll have that open discussion portion followed by Q&A. So Ben is actually going to start us off with the openings. And so Ben, I've got the timer set for you. It's ready to go. And so on your first word, I'll start it. Thanks so much. And the floor is yours.
All right. Thank you, James. Thank you, Pastor Douglas, for doing this. Before I start with the main line of argument, I want to clear up one possible source of confusion. I'm an atheist, obviously, and I'm here to defend the moral honor of atheism. But what I'm not is an anti-theist. I'm not here to besmirch the moral honor of theism. In fact, even though I'm an atheist and more than enough of a philosophy nerd to thoroughly enjoy arguing about topics like theism versus atheism, in the past, I've largely avoided this topic in public debates like this for the simple reason that I spend most of my time arguing about politics, and I don't want to give anyone who knows me from those contexts the impression that there's an anti-theistic component to what I advocate politically. There isn't. While I'm an atheist, and I clearly don't think that my being an atheist puts me at any sort of disadvantage in talking about morality, which is what we'll be discussing tonight, I deeply admire the Christian left, figures like Tony Benn or Cornel West, or just to pick a third progressive Christian at random, my wife.
You're muted there, Mark.
Just really quick, I think this is Ben's first mistake of the evening. not going the anti-theist route.
Yeah, acknowledging that there are good Christians is quite a concession off the bat.
I like it.
Yeah, why even do that?
In the future, the second A in GTAA will stand for anti-theist.
Yes, give them an anti-theist. That's what this podcast, aside from IQ and success, anti-theism is what this podcast is all about.
There's a niche
Yeah.
that we're working for.
Yeah.
In all seriousness, though, Ryan, I do want to. I've got this. I don't think you're an anti-theist, right?
I'm getting there. After what you just said, I'm now. I think I should be. Yeah.
I think I went through a kind of a new atheist phase, like a lot of people did. Kind of embarrassed by it now.
Yeah.
And I've dropped that, if not the atheism, but I still do. I don't think that fighting theism is the most important political fight of our lives. But I do have like a kind of background discomfort with religion.
Yeah. Okay. That's fair. I mean, yeah, if we're being serious, I definitely went through my anti-theist phase, for sure. I'm now pretty indifferent to that. I mean, philosophically, I'm very interested in it. I enjoy these kinds of debates. But if I meet someone and they're religious and they're not trying to push it on me, I kind of don't care. Like, just that there's so many other issues that are just way, way, way more pressing. I mean, overall, do I think the world would be better if we could do away with organized religion? Yeah, probably. But that's like number 50 on the list of things we could do to improve the world.
I don't think Ben would agree with that.
Yeah.
I think he's completely agnostic about it because low IQ.
Right.
But I think that there's kind of a master argument against religion. Here it is. Ready?
Okay. I'm ready.
In general, it's better to have true beliefs than false beliefs. Religions advocate false beliefs. Now that you have to concede, but I don't see how you can't concede. Even if you're religious, whatever religious faith you have is incompatible with a bunch of other religious faiths. Even if you're ecumenical, your ecumenicism is incompatible with other religious faiths. So they have to be mostly false.
Right. Most religious beliefs have to be false. That's right.
False beliefs are bad, or even worse when they're held with indefatigable fervor. And religious beliefs are held that way generally.
Usually, yeah. I think that's
Ergo.
right. No, I mean, I tend to find that argument pretty convincing. So yeah, I think we do better without systems that promote lots of false beliefs. But yeah, I don't think this is, again, I'm past my phase where like my Sam Harris, Richard Dawkins phase where this is the big issue that we have to deal with. It's pretty low on the list.
Absolutely. If I met Cornell West, I wouldn't even dream.
Yeah.
I'm thinking this argument, there are way more important things to talk about. But this is why the new give them an argument format, GTAA : IQ and success is an explicitly anti-theistic YouTube channel and podcast.
Yes.
I think there's a political argument for keeping the like atheism on the back burner as an issue, because I think that there are also tons of people to build coalitions with that are religious people that probably believe in a lot of positive rights, but the second you start bashing their religion as something you'd want to abolish, you lose them.
Yeah, that's right. I don't think
Yeah.
any political program that involves abolishing religion is a starter.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
Even just like a rhetorical stand against it, not like a the system that I envision would abolish religion. I think that if you're trying to promote like a left political project, we already have, so few people that genuinely understand, understand class and their class position, that I think adding that component into it without at least being an analysis of, the church as a hierarchical institution, like 100% is I think a valid thing to go after. But religion as a concept, I'd say loses people. That's my
I think that's very plausibly, a very reasonable explanation of why Ben spends a little time clearing his throat here and making sure he knows that people know he's not on that side of the issue.
Yeah.
But it is where we are now. So
I was
forward.
incredibly anti-theistic after being raised as both like first a Catholic and then an Episcopal, which is kind of like weaning off being a Catholic.
Right.
So so it's something that an idea. I mean, like a strategy I've come to after knowing religious people that, it kind of pulled me, like knowing spiritual but not religious people, that kind of pulled me out of that that mindset, I guess.
Yeah, the Michael Brooks of the world, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
and I mean, I like a lot of people in my family have similar spiritual politics, I'd say, to Michael too. I mean, it's not just like the Catholic part of it. I don't know. So yeah, that's my one interjection.
Yeah, I hope you're going to feel comfortable staying on board with the program, even though we're going to be explicitly and obnoxiously anti-theistic from now on.
Only if we can do the hard pivot to like neocon politics, like the Sam Harris style like thought experiments about bombing the Middle East. I'll stick around. I'll stick around for those.
That's right. It's important that we don't advertise that we're doing that, though.
Oh fuck, we're on, aren't we? I forgot this one.
This is live. This is live.
All right, back to the waiting room with me.
All right. All right, shall we resume?
Oh yeah, of course.
Wife Jennifer Burgess. So that's not the point, right? I think that like people like Robert E. Lee, who fought for what I regard as the most evil cause in human history, was a Christian, but so was John Brown. So it's clearly possible to be on the right side of history and disagree with me about metaphysics. All I need from anyone politically is that they don't have any interest in trying to impose their religious beliefs on others. All right, that extended bit of throat clearing out of the way, let's get to the main event. I became interested in doing this debate because I have read and watched Pastor Douglas say that without theism, it's impossible to have what he will call authoritative morality, as opposed to just statements of preference. Sometimes this seems to be a claim about moral motivation, that without a divine enforcer to reward or punish people, they don't have a reason to act morally. To the extent that this is the claim, I think that's wrong in multiple very deep ways, and I'm sure we'll get to that later on. But in the limited time I have for this opening statement, I want to focus on what I think is the main claim being made. So Pastor Douglas is a presuppositionalist, meaning he thinks it's impossible for theists and atheists to debate on neutral ground. You have to assume something about the existence or non-existence of God to get started. On the face of it, you'd think that this would make debates like this one impossible. The reason it doesn't is that, as any good philosopher or logician should be able to tell you, one of the best ways to argue against any position is to assume its presuppositions for the sake of argument and derive unsavory conclusions from them that don't follow from your view. I take it, is what Pastor Douglas is doing when he criticizes atheists as being unable to make sense of the idea of authoritative morality, by which he usually seems to mean, and I'm sure we'll get into this later, objective morality. And while I do think it's entirely possible to have an argument between theists and atheists on neutral ground, certainly on many subjects, that way of framing it is one that I'm perfectly happy to use as far as we conduct tonight's debate. And I want to make two very simple points here. These are going to be my two big claims. The first is that on the presupposition that there is no God, there are plenty of philosophical options for making sense of the idea that morality is not relative to time, place, or culture, or relative to individual preferences, but that right things would be right even if no one ever knew that they were right, and wrong things would be wrong even if no one ever knew that they would be wrong. So, for example, you can be an atheist utilitarian and believe that whatever maximizes well-being and minimizes suffering is objectively right, no matter who does or doesn't think it's right. You could be an atheist Kantian and believe that treating other people as mere means to your ends is objectively morally wrong, no matter who does or doesn't think it's morally wrong. You could be an atheist Rawlsian and believe that whatever society perfectly rational people would decide if they had to do, they had to live in it, but they didn't know whether they were going to be born black or white, male or female, rich or poor, is objectively a just society, even if no one considers it just. So that's the first point. Now, maybe you don't find any of these options plausible. Maybe you think, as many philosophers, including some atheist ones, have, that there's a deep philosophical problem with making sense of the idea of objective morality. Of what would that even mean for morality to be objective? Well, if you think so, that brings us to the second point, which is this one. If it's a big philosophical problem, how to make sense of objective morality, accepting for the sake of argument the presupposition of theism does literally nothing to solve that problem. It doesn't help in any way. The view that it would help, at least in its purest form, is called divine command ethics. The divine command ethicist says that morality isn't about what the utilitarian thinks it's about, maximizing well-being and minimizing suffering. It's not about not treating people as mere means like the Kantian thinks. It's not about what the Rawlsian thinks it's about. It's about doing whatever God commands. And there's a very simple and totally unsolvable problem with this moral framework, one that has been well known philosophically for thousands of years, and one which has convinced even many thoughtful Christian philosophers who know about it that divine command ethics must be the wrong way to think about morality. Now, I could see somebody watching this and say, how can you be a Christian and not be a divine command ethicist? We'll get to that. But let's talk about the argument itself. It's called the euthyphro objection. Euthyphro, I never trust my Greek pronunciation, which...
Hello? We all miss being in the office. Coworkers and coffee breaks.
I don't remember
to divine command ethics, and it comes from a dialogue written by Plato a little over 23 centuries ago. In the dialogue, Socrates is arguing with a character named Euthyphro about whether holiness can be defined as that which the gods love. Socrates asks him whether the gods love what they love because it is holy, or whether the holy is holy because gods love it, because the gods love it. Translated Socrates' challenge into the terms of tonight's debate, the question is whether what God commands us to do is morally good because God commands it, or whether God commands it because it's good. So start with the second option. If you say that God commands it because it's morally good, then you've just stepped out of divine command ethics. You've just accepted that it's good for some reason other than that God commands it. If, on the other hand, it's morally good because God commands it, then you have this problem. If God hypothetically had commanded you, thou shalt kill whosoever shall annoy you, and rape whosoever you shall lust after, and thou shalt not under any circumstances be kind or charitable or help little old ladies cross the street, then you would have to say that murder and rape would be good, and charity and kindness and helping little old ladies cross the street would be morally bad. That's absurd. And note that it's absurd in exactly the same way that moral relativism is absurd. It's absurd in exactly the same way that it would be absurd to say that if the Nazis had won World War II and killed everyone who disagreed with their actions, or brainwashed everybody who was left to think that exterminating Jews was morally right, then it would follow that from that the exterminating Jews would be morally right. If you think that's absurd, in exactly the same way, you should think that thinking that murder and rape were morally right if they'd been commanded by God would be morally good. In fact, the more we think about this objection, the more that we can see that divine command ethics is a form of relativism. It says that morality is relative to God's arbitrary preferences. And a quick word to any Christian viewers who may be encountering this argument for the first time. If what you're thinking right now is, oh, but God wouldn't command these terrible things because those things are bad and God is good, you've just rejected divine command ethics. If God wouldn't command them because they're morally bad, then their moral badness must be logically independent of God's commands. This is why philosophically sophisticated Christians understand that to make sense of the idea that God's commands are objectively good, they have to give up divine command ethics and say that God commands good things because they're good, not the other way around. They could still say that reading the Bible or praying for guidance is a good way to find out what's good and bad, because God, on their view, is all-knowing, and so, of course, he would know all the moral facts as well as all the other kinds of facts. But whatever you think of that claim, it's a completely different claim than saying that God's will is what makes morally good things morally good and morally bad things morally bad, which I think is what Pastor Douglas is going to need to say in order to make sense of the idea that it's impossible to make sense of objective morality on the presupposition of atheism. Now, some people who want to hold on to divine command ethics think that it somehow helps to start talking about how God's commands aren't arbitrary because they flow from God's nature. Trust me, that won't help. The reason it won't help is because it leads to the exact same problem again. It just pushes it one link up the chain. So the question now, if God's nature is kind and merciful and steadfast, is, okay, what if God's nature had been cruel and capricious and unforgiving? Would that therefore be a morally good nature? In other words, is what makes kindness and steadfastness and forgiveness good the fact that that happens to be God's nature, or is that God's nature because God is a morally good being? It's exactly the same problem. Now, I think we could follow this thread of argument up a lot more. I'm sure that we will. We get to the open dialogue portion of the evening. I also really hope when we get to the open dialogue, we talk about this business about moral motivation, because again, sometimes it seems to me that that is what Pastor Douglas seems to be talking about when he uses this phrase, authoritative morality. But if we don't get to those two subjects, somebody please ask about them in the Q&A, because I really want to talk about both. But right now, I've probably been going on long enough for the opening statement. So, Pastor Douglas, the floor.
That was a very very high IQ introduction. I liked, especially, I really enjoyed his presentation of the euthyphro dilemma, especially his. I think it's right, but also rhetorically very good to emphasize that, because Doug Wilson's going to come at atheism and say atheism is all relativism. So it's very good to hit on the point right away that if you take the horn of the dilemma that Wilson's going to take, that's also a form of relativism.
Yeah. So over the past few weeks, Ryan, Ben, and I have sat and watched William Lane Craig debate Christopher Hitchens and then Shelley Kagan. And both times I brought up this concern that neither Hitchens nor Kagan started the debate by trying to put Craig, a theist, on his back foot with this euthyphro dilemma.
Yep.
And then I went on to explain the dilemma. So really high IQ here of Ben to pretty much copy me.
Yeah. I mean, this is one of our the techniques we'll be teaching over the course of this podcast. One of the ways to raise your IQ is to emulate high IQ people. And Ben's doing a fantastic job of that here. Anybody
who's a professor will tell you plagiarism is a great way to get to success. Yeah. And anything that gets you to success is high IQ.
Yeah, by definition. That's what high IQ means.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay, let's keep going.
Yeah, let's keep going.
Good job, Ben.
Yeah. Floor is yours.
Thanks so much. We'll kick it over. Floor is all yours, Doug.
All right. Thanks very much. I want to begin with my gratitude. I want to thank the host of this debate, the good folks of Modern Day Debate, in a time when many are clamoring for actual intellectual interaction about things that actually matter, to have them banned and chased off the premises we need to have more exchanges like this, not fewer. So I'm very, very grateful. I'm also grateful to Ben Burgess for agreeing to have this discussion. I noticed that he naturally received some pressure online encouraging him to pull his skirts away from me with a sneer, which he resisted, and straight up the middle, I'm very grateful for that. I really do appreciate it. Living in cancel culture the way we do, we just have to resist every form of shouting people down. We need to hear people out. So, to the question, is atheism immoral? As the Christian in this debate, I naturally have the affirmative. And so I want to hasten to clarify what form of this I would want to defend and what form of it I would not defend. All right. So that question, is atheism immoral, can be construed in different ways. And I am more than eager to defend one form of it and not at all eager to defend forms of it that I would regard as silly or inconsequential. Of course, so a few qualifiers on what I do not mean. Given, of course, as a Christian, given that God exists, to deny that he does would be a sin, and hence an immoral position, right? So if it's true that God exists and we owe everything to him and he loves us and we're saying, I don't think you're there, of course, that's a sin, and hence immoral. But I'm not taking our question in that sense, because that's, at one level, that would be like asking, is atheism atheistic? Right? It'd be tautological. It'd be a debate about nothing. So I don't take the question in that way. Rather, I believe the question has to do with whether atheism is a greenhouse that grows levels of accepted immorality that surpass the levels that the human race has always been able to produce. So wherever the human race goes, you're going to find all kinds of gaudy misbehavior. And you're going to find a sort of baseline of human sinfulness, human wickedness, human iniquity. And you're going to find it among Buddhists and among Hindus and among Muslims and among Christians. Every culture under the sun, including the Christian ones, has had to grapple with and deal with the fact of human frailty, human sinfulness, human problems. So I'm taking this as, is atheism something that takes it to the next level? I can't argue that atheism is immoral because atheists have been known to sin, because everybody does. Right? That wouldn't prove anything. So, is atheism a greenhouse that grows these things to a level that is out of the ordinary? If sins were pumpkins, does atheism produce prize winners for the state fair? Does atheism produce really big pumpkins? And I believe, actually, the answer to that question is yes. But I think you have to zoom out and look at the big picture. And that leads to the next qualifier. I'm not maintaining, for example, that if I lived next door to Ben and my wife and I were going on vacation, that his atheism would somehow require him, as soon as we disappeared around the corner, to run over and burn down my house. I don't believe that is what we're discussing. I don't believe that. No, I'm sure we'd get along fine, and that he would be happy to take in our mail and so on. And I can also, in my thought experiment, come up with certain Christians that I wouldn't want to ask to take in my mail, that I wouldn't get along with as well. So, in certain respects, if we're talking about public morality or how you behave in your interactions with other people, we also have to reckon with the bell curve, which is the fact, if I say something like men are taller than women, I'm dealing with two bell curves, and I can easily produce certain women who are taller than certain men, and thus my generalization is falsified, but it's not really falsified because it was a generalization. So I believe that atheistic cultures, atheistic societies do get to hellish levels of immorality, but I don't believe that that's the case for individual atheists necessarily at all. So I'm not maintaining that. So in what sense would I want to argue that atheism is immoral? There are three things that I would like to mention, and to anticipate Ben's reference to motivation is my third one. So there's two things that I want to tag first as more important, but motivation is my third point, and it, I think, is an important one, but just not the most important one. The first thing I want to mention is that we have a need for God in order to have a fixed definition of morality, If there is no God, and Darwin is right, then morality must evolve right along with us. There were things that we used to be able to do back when we were eels. There are things we used to be able to do when we were crustaceans. There are things that we could do that we can't do now because the species evolves and the morality, the accepted canons of behavior evolve right along with us. What we currently call moral, and I put that in scare quotes, what we currently call moral is no more fixed than the fins that we used to have or the antenna that we will have someday. The fins that we used to have are all gone now, and our morality that we had back then is gone also, and the morality that we currently have is going to be gone when we get to the antenna stage. So the need for a shared definition of morality is crucial in a debate like this, because what will happen at some point if I point to abortion or to same-sex marriage or to statist thieveries, and I say, well, of course, atheism produces pro-abortion legislation and produces openness to any kind of marriage you want to have, and it produces, I'm sure I could develop my list or extend my list of immoral offenses, and if I get it long enough, then Ben's going to interrupt and say something like, those things aren't immoral. What are you talking about? Well, clearly, what I'm talking about at that point is we have different definitions of morality. So our understanding of morality might overlap somewhat, but you have to start with definitions. And I think definitions come back to, on things like morality, come back to the two great playground questions of why and who says, right? Why and who says. So next, the second thing that I want to get to is the need for a rationale. So the first is the definition. How do we define what is moral and immoral? The second is the need for a rationale for morality. And in this case, for any kind of morality at all, whether it's Ben's or mine's or somebody else. By this, I mean any system that says to an individual, you ought to do thus and such. If there's a thou shalt not, if you're out of line for doing this, you ought to have done otherwise. If a system comes from outside the individual and says you ought to do this, then somebody's going to say, why? Who says? Why and who says? Where does that ought come from? Where does that ought come from? Where do we get obligation? What produces obligation? Moral, and specifically moral obligation. What is its basis? So let us postulate that Ben and I have a friend in common. Okay, we have a friend in common, and he is a man who's a dedicated atheist. He's on his deathbed, and Ben and I arrive at the same time to say our farewells to him. This friend takes the opportunity to tell the two of us that he lived as he pleased, and that, speaking quite frankly now, since he's going to die later that day, he has gotten away with a bunch of stuff. Let's say that he then mentions a line of atrocities that he's committed, and that Ben and I are both appalled by the things he's done. All right, so Ben and I don't have any difference at all about our disapproval of what this guy's behavior has been. We both disapprove of it. The issue of the rationale comes in when our friend passes away, and Ben and I are standing out on his front lawn, about to go our respective ways, and we get to talking about why we disapprove. Okay, why do we disapprove? Why was this guy wrong? All right, so the issue is not whether it's possible, and this is something that Ben alluded to in his opening statement. The issue is not whether it's possible for this friend to have been a Kantian or to have been a utilitarian. That's true. He could have been those things, just as Ben can be those things. But as it turned out, as it happened, what he actually was a nihilist. What he actually was someone who said, I'm going to do absolutely whatever I want to. Imagine there's no heaven. It's easy if you try. No hell below us. I'm going to do as I please. My question is not whether Ben makes room for the Kantian and utilitarian and other forms of atheism that hold to an objective morality. My question is whether he has room for the nihilist who lives that way. Is that consistent also? Okay. Now, then that leads to the third thing. The third thing has to do with the motivation. So the first is, how do we define morality? And I think we can realize that on a number of fundamental issues, the Christian and the atheist would define it very, very differently. The second thing is how, if we have an area of shared agreement on these things our deceased friend did that we both disapprove of, what is our rationale for disapproving of it? And can we say that this selfish man who just passed away was in any way wrong? Who did he sin against? What did he violate? He did get away with it. He got clean away with it. But then third is motivation for living morally. And this is reflected a little bit in my scenario of the man on the deathbed. The human race is a piece of work. We do all kinds of awful things to one another. And because we do awful things to one another, we need encouragement. We need help. We need to realize that we are not the fine beings that we like to flatter ourselves that we are. And one of the things that is a motivating factor is the reality of justice. Not justice as an abstraction, but justice as in judgment coming. So when a person lives his life in the fear of God, not fear in the sense of scared, but fear in the sense of an awesome respect for who God is, and the realization that we are all going to appear before the judgment seat of God, and we're going to answer for how we live. We're going to. This is a graded course. Now, oftentimes, anybody who wants to tell you that students behave in exactly the same way in pass-fail courses that they do in graded courses hasn't been teaching very long. People behave differently. And if you convince the population, if you convince the entire population that there is no accountability, there are no final grades, there is no day of judgment, there are many people who have lived lives of unbridled selfishness and who got clean away with it. If you convince them that that's the way it is, there will be a number of people who will aspire to that. And when they aspire to that, the atheist is not in a position to say, you're making a wrong choice. Says who? Why is that a wrong choice? All right, I'm good there.
Thank you very much. We'll jump into the open conversation. Want to let you...
Whew.
Man.
So
I just felt my IQ dip. I'm down to like 95 now.
I didn't watch this debate before tonight because preparing things is low IQ.
Very low IQ. You just count on your brain to handle it in the moment.
Right.
And that was a huge mistake. My brain could not handle all of what it just took in.
So I thought this was going to be like a philosophical engagement. And it kind of looks like it might be in a bit, but he set the stage like he wants to make the argument that as an empirical matter of fact,
Yes.
being an atheist statistically makes you more likely to be immoral.
Now, I'll give him credit. This is kind of a high IQ move to make a really strong empirical claim and offer zero evidence for it. That's very alpha, very high IQ. I like it.
Yeah, this man's brain band. That's quite a move.
Yeah, so so his whole argument hinges on this empirical thing, and with with no evidence.
Well, he starts with this empirical claim, and then moves on to something that looked more like good old-fashioned philosophy, right? I have to say that after several hours of listening to William Lane Craig make relatively sophisticated and clear arguments, and being kind of frustrated to see him bend his obviously high IQ to silly ends, this was a breath of fresh air. These were not very clear or cogent arguments.
We had a lot of plant metaphors, greenhouses, pumpkins, very, very vivid. Okay. Forrest,
can I just say that this last episode that we did, the Jordan Peterson episode, to get ready for that, I had to watch like 6-7 hours of Jordan Peterson lectures where he's doing the similar thing where he he makes all these weird like examples and like illusions, and I think I really did lose IQ points during that weekend. But I don't know. I think that it's kind of, I mean, I'm glad he didn't go for the full well, atheism is immoral because there's a God, like that logic, like that circular logic thing. Because I feel like one problem with trying to debate like super religious people is that their ultimate card is like, well, no matter what you say to me rhetorically or logically, like in the end I'm right because there's a God and I believe there's a God. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's hard. Like, I feel like to have any kind of a successful debate with somebody who has that level of religiosity, I guess, is
it's frustrating. I mean, at least with someone like Craig, who is just as religious, but he will at least try to respond to the arguments. Like Wilson here, like, I mean, Ben explained, like he set him up, like we said, he did exactly what we wished that Shelley Kagan and Hitchens would have done. He set him up initially saying, look, appealing to God isn't going to answer these hard questions in any way whatsoever. And Wilson just didn't even respond to that at all. He just didn't even acknowledge that Ben had already undercut him in that way.
It's kind of similar to how I feel about like abortion debates. Like, if you debate somebody who believes very strongly in believes very strongly that abortion is a sin, like the response is, yeah, well, you're a baby killer. You know what I mean? Like, that's like the ultimate conclusion of it. And in this sense, it's like, yeah, well, you're a moral atheist. So I don't know. It's a very
question begging kind of thing. But it's very, it is frustrating.
I do want to at least draw some parallels between what Wilson is doing now and what we saw Craig doing in a more sophisticated voice, which is both of them. And I think this is a very common move for this kind of theological account of morality, is points to what they think of as a motivational vacuum for the atheist.
Yeah.
If you're an atheist and you see this person on his deathbed saying that he was a shit his whole life, you have no resources to tell him why he shouldn't have behaved that way. Yeah. Whereas the theist does, because the theist can say, God's gonna punish you.
God's gonna get you
for it now.
God's gonna get you. Yeah. Yeah, that's the little kid kind of more like when you look at Piaget and those people who have the models of moral reasoning, that's like little kid moral reasoning. Like when you can say the reason to be good is because if you don't, your dad's going to beat you or whatever. Like this is just the exact same thing. And it's a self-indictment when people make these kinds of arguments.
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah, it's associate. It's like
I'm sorry. I anticipate you because we're both such high IQ people.
High IQ frequency matching.
Yeah.
It's a sociopathic argument. I mean,
Yeah.
so is the one about like, oh, people behave differently in a graded class than a pass fail thing.
Exactly.
They're telling when you make those arguments, you are telling on yourself, right?
Yeah.
You're showing the audience what your conception of morality is,
Mm-hmm.
and it's kind of ghoulish, right?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So that said, it's something I'm sure that Ben will address that.
Yeah.
I can't imagine he'll go slide by.
I do want to give Wilson some IQ credit points for the same-sex mirage pun. That's
I didn't
clever.
catch that.
Yeah, so he said same-sex marriage, but he said mirage instead of marriage.
I would have given him points.
Oh, because he's a ghoul.
Yeah, because he's a ghoul. Yeah.
I would have given him.
I haven't seen this since you're Are they gonna have like a conversation about Stalin and shit? Is that where this is going?
I only watched the question parts that we played on the show. I didn't have the mental energy to watch everything that they talked about. I would have given him ghoul points for his mirage pun if it was just a pun and it wasn't the title of his book that he was plugging. That kind of
that wasn't on his feet. So this was actually the title of the book. Okay.
Yeah. Well, I put it in his book is Same-Sex Mirage and Some Biblical Response. Oh, Same-Sex Mirage, Phantasmagoria at the Altar, and Some Biblical Responses is the name of his 2016 book.
Oh, someone else probably wrote that for him then. So yeah, that's probably not even that's a very low. He's just repeating the title that some publisher wrote.
Yeah. No, it's like if Ben was like, well, I'd like to give them an argument right now.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, yeah. Very low IQ. Never mind. Terrible fun. Terrible fun.
You know, folks, we are on podcast. If you didn't know, we're really excited about it. We've gotten a lot of positive feedback. And so pull out your favorite podcast app and see if you can find us. And also want to let you know, if you're listening via podcast right now, our guests are linked in the description of the podcast as well. And so you can hear plenty more from our guests by clicking on those links in the description. And with that, we'll kick it over to the open discussion portion. And so thanks, gentlemen. The floor is all yours.
Yeah, so there's a lot going on there. So one of the first claims was that there's going to be a certain amount of immorality in any human society, but that you're going to get more immorality given widespread atheism. Now that's an empirical claim, so that's actually testable. We don't just have to speculate about it. And granted, the experiments that we have are not laboratory pristine, because there are other factors that confound it. But it is striking that they don't seem to bear out what Pastor Douglas is predicting here. That so if you look at the countries in the world with the highest rate of irreligion, you'll see places like Sweden and Denmark that also have much lower rates of things like murder and rape than the United States, which is one of the most religious countries in the first world. Of course, as I said,
why'd you leave out the Soviet Union?
Well, we can talk about the Soviet Union too, but but first let's talk about Sweden and Denmark. And of course, I think that this is not a pristine laboratory experiment because they have a lot more irreligion than we do, but they also have more of what you referred to earlier as statist thievery, which I take it means redistributive taxation, welfare state, stuff like that.
All that bad stuff.
Yeah. Well, I tend to. I won't blame your Christianity for your having that opinion. There is a long and honorable list of Christians who disagree with you, so at the very least, we can say that if it is a greenhouse of immorality, I don't think there's any evidence that it is. But if it is a greenhouse of immorality, then at least the version of that greenhouse that's combined with lots of status thievery and social welfare seems to be one that grows much smaller pumpkins than we get in countries like the United States. And I'd also point out, of course, that if we're going to talk about the state fair winners, I mean, this is, obviously the list of religious immoral, winners at the state fair of immorality is very long and presumably doesn't need to be recited here.
So let me start with that and then work back to Denmark and Sweden and so on. Let's take a famous Christian atrocity that really was an atrocity, the Spanish Inquisition. Okay, take something like the Spanish Inquisition, which was horrible, offensive to God, bad, wicked. I'll call it every name you want me to call it. But the Spanish Inquisition, over the course of its history, was responsible for about 2,000 executions. That was Stalin on a slow afternoon. Okay, so basically, when we're looking at the iniquity of atheistic regimes, I'm thinking of places like North Korea, Soviet Union, godless places. And when I go to places like Scandinavia, this is where my point about the definition of morality comes into play, because the Scandinavians are immoral in a different way than the Soviets were. So you're likely, if I went to Scandinavia and said, does their godlessness have anything to do with pornography use? Okay, the answer is yes, but I think it would be much less likely that a Swede would run over and burn down my house. The Soviets would take me out of my house, burn down my house, and send me off to the gulag because I was thinking, thoughts that I ought not to think. So there's oppressive, violent iniquity, but there are also forms of immorality that are not rapacious, that are not violent. Sweden hasn't invaded anybody lately. They're not running concentration camps, but that doesn't mean that there's no immorality there, right? So this goes back to the question of definition.
Your initial example about the kind of immorality.
Didn't he start this whole thing off by saying that he wasn't going to make the tautological argument that atheism is immoral because it's immoral to be an atheist?
Mm-hmm.
But now he's sort of making a circular argument here, right? That Sweden is immoral, but it's only immoral in a way that you can process if you've already committed yourself to the falsity of atheism.
That's right. Yeah, he's not spelling out what he means by. I'm really curious exactly what he means by that. If he wants to avoid it being tautological, he's got to have some specific examples of the kinds of. I mean, is he thinking things like gay mirage and pornography and yeah? So I mean, but
even pornography is not immoral. It's high IQ. It's very cool. Yeah, but also,
look at the rates of porn consumption in the United States. I mean, come on. And if you ever look on, I you look at the states. I've seen like these charts. I don't know how accurate they are, but like memes that go around like which kinds of porn are the most popular in states, and like conservative states are into some really immoral kinds of, or at least things that I imagine Doug Wilson would find to be immoral. The things that are popular, especially like the incest porn and the faux incest porn and all that kinds of stuff.
Like Utah has the nation's highest online porn subscription, apparently.
Yeah. So even if you assume that porn is immoral, it's not going to help his argument.
He kind of pulled a very sneaky move in the beginning, because he said his argument wasn't going to be that individuals are more immoral because of atheism. It's that societies are more immoral because of atheism. Mm-hmm. So having to argue that now, obviously, with the Nordic countries, by any conceivable metric of like standard of rule of law or anything, you can't argue that. Like, we have far more murders here than they'll ever have. We have far more rapes per capita than they'll ever have. Like, we have violent crime in a way that they don't. But
we watch lots of porn.
Yeah, but his argument is going to be that their society is more subject to sin or like immorality than ours is. So it's kind of, I don't know. It was kind of a sneaky slip of a word there, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, it seems vaguely circular. But anyways, let's
see. Let's watch Ben to his high IQ thing.
Go.
You're most likely to get in Sweden, and you brought up use of pornography and said that we contribute that to their atheism. Again, I think the empirical data doesn't really back that up. The 2 states in the United States that have the highest rates of porn download are Mississippi and Utah. And I don't think that those are the states with the highest rate of atheists. So I think that, again, whether the state fair results actually correlate with your prediction, I'm not convinced of. Now, we could talk about the Soviet Union and the atrocities, that were committed under Stalin, which are certainly very real. But one problem with that is that if what we're going to focus on there as the problem is the fact that Stalin's particular ideology wasn't a religious ideology, that the governing party was atheistic, then you have a problem because Nazi Germany committed much worse atrocities, and their governing ideology was not atheistic. The most evil system that's ever existed in the history of the human race, chattel slavery in the American South, was one that was overseen by people who certainly saw themselves as Bible believing Christians. So I think that this claim that just even in terms of correlation, I think that this claim that we could say where there's atheism, then you're going to see more atrocity.
I guess Ben purposely brought up the slavery example because of this guy's history of defending and laundering the Southern Confederate image. This was a part that he showed during the episode after he finished the debate. So
okay,
check that.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, that's good. That's very high IQ of Ben. Mark, you're muted. It's very, very low IQ, Mark.
Pathetic.
Yeah.
Embarrassing.
Yeah.
On Wikipedia, it says Doug Wilson, his most controversial work is probably his pamphlet Southern Slavery as It Was. The pamphlet stated that, quote, slavery produced in the South a genuine affection between the races that we believe we can say has never existed in any nation before the war or since. So
this okay.
Foolish.
Okay, so wow. So this is a very good move on Ben's part. If Ben can get Doug Wilson speaking in defense of slavery, I mean that's the end. I mean, you lose the debate. Defending slavery is very low IQ in a debate. I mean, Jesus Christ.
Same race. It's same race mirage.
Yeah.
Same race mirage.
Well, I mean, look, there's
oh God.
There's an argument here that speaks to the actual matter at hand. The Bible never, in no spot in the Bible does Jesus or any of God's representatives speak out against slavery.
No, that's right. And like, a number of leaders explicitly appealed to the Bible. You can question whether they were, of course, Christians now will say they were doing that inerrantly, but nonetheless, they very explicitly appealed to the Bible to justify slavery. Like there's certainly passages of the Bible that look like they're in support of slavery.
There's parts of the Bible that they justify, like how much, like what you can do to your slave, right? Like how you can lash your slave and like, yeah. So that's, I mean, I don't know. I think the Bible can really be used to justify any system as it is, because even if there's no reference to something, like there's the passage in the Bible that's like, oh well, a king, like obeying the king is something that God wants. So like, you know what I mean? Like there's always it's like it's a status quo affirming set of books.
Well, if you just take and list all of the commands about sexual behavior in the Bible. How many are there? I mean, there's got to be a lot, right?
Mhm.
About what you can and can't do. Just go to Leviticus and read down the list. That tells you if the Bible is our conduit to the will of the Supreme Being. He cares a lot about where we put our dinguses. But the same being, even if you can argue your way to the conclusion that the Bible never technically endorses or advocates slavery, the fact that the Supreme Being didn't feel the call to point out that the worst thing that was happening on the planet, didn't feel the need to call that thing out and say we should stop doing that. It really undermines the claim that the Bible gives us some special moral insight that good old fashioned, moral philosophy or just reading a book can't.
Yeah.
There's also the passage about like wearing two different fabrics, and it looks like he's wearing multiple different fabrics. There's the argument about like, the shellfish, like eating shellfish, like, you'd have to wonder if he does that. So it's kind of like, I feel like there's a very pick and choose side to that. But in that same way, it is pretty clear, I think, about the slavery thing. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it is pretty clear that like there's literal instructions like, hey, you can do this with your slave. You can't do this with your slave. So I think that getting him to defend that is a high IQ alpha move for sure.
Yeah.
We don't say alpha move here on the new given an argument. We just say high IQ.
Mm-hmm.
I worked for.
They mean the same thing, but we prefer
for TMBS for too long to alpha out of my.
Fair enough. But yeah, I mean, they mean the same thing, but we're focusing on IQ here.
And its connection to success.
Yeah. Success, alpha, high IQ. Really 3 different ways of saying the same thing.
I'm excited for our big Jordan Peterson guest appearance tomorrow.
Oh, that's going to be great.
Yeah.
Or worse morality. I think certainly, at least given that fragment of morality that we agree on, I think is going to be pretty dubious. I think that the problem with Stalin's Russia was not the fact that the governing party happened to be atheistic. It was the lack of political democracy and legal institutions that would stop the governing party from doing those things, which is not something that's a product of atheism. I mean, if anything, the struggle for democracy globally is something that had to contend against many centuries of Christian theology justifying, absolute monarchy. But I don't want to spend too long on this because you mentioned 3 points, and I think they're all important. So I mean, unless you have more you want to say about this, I would like to.
Well, let me ask you one question about it. One question, sure. Then we can go back to my 3 points, and sure. I want to get to your euthyphro issue also. Let's say you and I, let's say our deathbed friend, not that you or I would be friends with him, but let's say our deathbed friend was Stalin, and he's going to die in 15 minutes, and we're talking to him, and he says to us, well, I got away with it. How is he wrong?
He's not wrong that he got away with it. He is wrong if he thinks that means that it's fine. I think a really useful way to think about this, because those seems like there are 2 very different issues that are being conflated here. Whether he had a self-interested reason not to do what he did, and whether he had a moral reason not to do what he did. In fact, normally we think, like I think.
So why does he have a moral obligation to be a Kantian or a utilitarian? Why can't he be what he was? Why isn't that one of the options?
Well, sure. It's to the extent that it's an option. It's equally an option if you're a theist. That there's absolutely nothing about theism that makes that any less of an option. Any argument that I can give for Kantianism, utilitarianism, Rawlsianism, any of those options, any argument I can give against moral nihilism doesn't gain anything if you say, oh, and also God exists. If somebody says, oh, I think God exists, I think that God has very specific things that he commands me to do, he commands me not to do, but I don't think that that gives me any sort of moral obligation. I think that maybe it gives me a self-interested reason to do these things because God might reward me for doing them or punish me for not doing them, but I don't think it gives them any moral reason. I'm a nihilist about morality. Then any argument you could give against that would be exactly the same as an argument that an atheist could give against them. They're just separate questions. Like I think a really useful way of seeing that they're separate questions is to think about.
All right, so I just realized something about what's going on here. So the way that that Wilson is equating self-interest, which Ben is calling him out on right now, he's equating self-interest with morality. This is like reading Plato's dialogues. Like Wilson is just Thrasymachus, arguing that justice is whatever is to the advantage of the strong, and if the strong gets away with it, then how can you call it injustice? And that's not, that's not who you want to be in this debate. It's a very low IQ position to be in.
Yeah, low IQ, not unlike the position of a child who hasn't yet mastered moral language or concepts. And again, fucking ghoulish.
Yeah, God.
I mean, the implication is that if Doug Wilson has a change of faith, loses his Christian convictions and becomes an atheist, he will do horrible shit if he thinks he can get away with it.
Yeah. I mean, if he can get away with it, why not?
Yeah.
How are you going to say that it's immoral if he can get away with it?
This is Ben's too nice. I bet he doesn't make this move, but in Ben's shoes, I do think making this sort of personal, showing how your position on this kind of metaethical issue actually does reflect real things about your character, and calling out and putting a lot of pressure on those faults in his character and his low IQ.
Yeah.
That would be
the greatest fault of his character is
his low IQ. Yeah.
His endorsement of slavery, his his admission that he would do anything if he get away with it. Character flaws, low IQ, man.
Because if you have a low IQ, how can you have success?
Yep, exactly.
Well, he's a Confederate general that's traveled, from the 1860s into the future to debate Ben. So
yeah,
he's
it makes sense.
Why he keeps bringing up all of his dying friends, because he left them all back in the 1860s.
Yeah,
we're gonna make fun of his appearance a lot, probably, but I'm a little uncomfortable with it now because first, when you're not on screen and it's just me right next to him, it kind of looks like that's what I'm going to look like in 20 years.
Oh, I can see it. Yeah, you grow your hair out a little bit, you get that beard a little longer.
And then as you age, your nose gets a little bit more
He's got the rounder face, though. His face is a lot like
it's
a lot.
They have kind of a similar head shape. Their brain pan's probably a similar size. Oh God!
God told me I didn't have to free my slaves.
Yep. I got away with it. What's wrong with it?
Oh, I got away with it.
Oh man.
Borrow a thought experiment from Rene Descartes in his Meditations a few hundred years ago, where he says, imagine that the world was created and is ruled over not by a kind and loving God, but by a wicked and cruel but all-powerful demon. And Descartes was making a point about knowledge, but we could run with it in a slightly different way and say, imagine that this all-powerful demon had created all the things that you think that God created, a physical world, a bunch of people to populate it, and an afterlife. And that the demon was going to reward people who tortured and killed innocent heaven. He was going to punish people who had maybe helped try to save people from being tortured and killed by sending them to hell. Now, certainly in this world I'm describing, you would have a self-interested reason to torture and kill and all that. But I hope we agree that it wouldn't be a moral reason. We wouldn't morally admire people who tortured and killed in order to get on the good side of the all-powerful demon. We wouldn't morally condemn people who...
Why not?
Well, again, any possible answer to that why not that you could give, I can give. There's nothing that theism adds to it. In fact, I would say we would morally admire people who knew about the demon much more if they were protecting innocents from being tortured and killed, knowing full well that this meant that they were engaged in the ultimate act of self-sacrifice, that they were leaping into the eternal lake of fire. And it, again, this seems like if you think that relativism is a problem, if you think that it's bad to think that morality is just up to, the whims of a person, I don't see why it's any better to say that it's up to the whims of a different kind of being, if indeed it is up to their whims. If it's not up to their whims, then we seem to be in the other fork of the euthyphro dilemma and say that there's something else that makes it good, which is the reason that God commands you to do it.
Okay, so I promise to jump over to the euthyphro issue in 30 seconds, but I want to make one final point about our friend Stalin.
Yeah.
So if I'm talking to Stalin on his deathbed, and I'm talking to the Grand Inquisitor on his deathbed, and I step into their respective worlds, I say, Stalin, given your atheism, let's assume your atheism is correct. Well played, man. You got away with it. All right? If your atheism is correct, you pulled it off. If I'm by the deathbed of the Grand Inquisitor and I step into his worldview, there is a God who is ultimate justice. I step into that worldview. What I say to the Grand Inquisitor is, boy, are you in trouble, man.
Okay, sure, but let's say let's make a third hypothetical.
Just absolutely telling on himself, right?
And he just can't. I mean, even after Ben has explained it like really clearly in a really high IQ way, he's explained that he's conflating self-interest with morality, and Wilson just can't stop doing it. He just can't stop doing it. This is just staggering. I mean, telling on himself, but also just how can you be so low IQ that you can't understand the distinction that was just explained to you?
Yeah, this guy needs to measure his own skull size.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, he needs some phrenology. He needs to consult his local phrenologist and figure out what's going on there.
Look, all that philosophy stuff, well and good, but all right, let's go back to me having a dying friend on his deathbed, and I'm just saying, boy, you got away with it. How'd you do it?
Yeah,
I don't know.
Yeah. Unless you can say to the person, boy, you're in trouble, then what he did was morally okay. God, this is worse than I expected, honestly. I didn't think Doug Wilson would be. I didn't have high hopes for him, but I didn't think he's going to be.
I have to say though, as low IQ and ghoulish as the argument is, it's not that many steps away from the argument that William Craig was making with Shelley Kagan about how morality gets justified in the end, right? Mm-hmm. How can it be meaningful if we're headed towards the heat death of the universe, right? In both cases, you're looking for a moral reason outside of morality.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, at the end of the day, I mean, it ends up being an indictment of the person who's saying it. So, like, it's morally bankrupt, this kind of argument, when you wanted whether you're doing it in the very high IQ fancy way that Craig is doing it, or in the very low IQ dumb way that Wilson's doing it. It is a morally bankrupt argument at its core. But I just expected Wilson would be at least able to follow the argument a little better. Like, he's just not even following what Ben is saying. He just keeps going back to that same dead friend on the bed example.
And now Ben's going to make it worse, because when we paused, he said, now let's think of a third example. So he's saying, there's a third thing you're not going to understand.
Wilson can't follow three things. He can't follow two.
Now let's say you had a dead friend that was on his deathbed that was justifying slavery, and he made it to the end, made lots of money, and you say to him, "Congratulations, man, you made it." You know?
Yeah.
But
No one's going to punish you. It's
why does
moral.
he sound like Jeff Foxworthy?
You know you're justifying slavery if
if you say that it promoted racial harmony in a way that no other system did, you might be a slavery sympathizer. Oh, God. Oh, this is bad.
That the Grand Inquisitor is right about what God wants. I would say what he's doing is no less morally loathsome.
Can I say Grand Inquisitor sounds a little bit too much like Grand Wizard for my taste?
Mm-hmm.
I don't
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
Because he happens to be right about what God wants, that would just make God not morally good. That wouldn't make the Grand Inquisitor.
Okay, so this gets us full tilt into the euthyphro thing. So I'm there now. Happy to talk about it.
Awesome.
So if God commands, if something is only right because God commands it, then you've got the problem of God commanding evil and wickedness and so on, which you're describing right there. But if God is commanding things because they're good, then that standard of goodness is outside God, and he is submitting to it. And that standard of goodness is the word of the true God. There's a God above a God. In other words, God is answerable to someone or something. If God is answerable to someone or something, then he's not God.
Well,
okay.
But hold on. Note that the response just assumes that morality must be God commanded, that the only place that morality can come from is being commanded by a God, which is exactly the issue and dispute right now. I mean, it just straightforward.
Right. So I wanted to
go question.
You anticipated this at the tail end of your comments. I would want to say that God does that righteousness, holiness, goodness these are all attributes of God. They're simply descriptive of the way he is. So it's not something that he could have created maple trees with pink bark. He could have done something different there, but he couldn't have created a world in which squares were round or in which righteousness was unrighteous, because that would violate his own nature and character. God can do anything consistent with his own nature and character. And his own nature and character as a necessary being means that he does not submit to outside authority. He's not bound to a standard of good outside of himself, and he can't create a standard of good that's contrary to the way he is. So these things are, and the other thing is that God is not a contingent being. So he is what he is necessarily. That means God is not just holy, he is necessarily holy. It could not be otherwise. That means, because Christians confess that God is an absolute being, not a contingent being. He's absolutely a necessary being, and his attributes of justice and righteousness and kindness and love are eternal, just as he is. All that is in God is God. And so consequently, it's like, for me to try to imagine Descartes' demoniac God is like trying to imagine a Platonic form, a Platonic realm of the forms where all the squares were circular. It just doesn't work. I can't get my mind around it, because God confesses, I am that I am. God is the way he is. And so consequently, morality is simply a reflection of.
Okay, so he's just doing the exact thing. Ben already, I'm sure Ben's going to point this out here in a second, but at the very beginning, Ben said, if you try to make this, it's just God's nature's move, that doesn't help solve the problem in any way whatsoever. And I always find it strange that that people want to make this move. They act like this is like and even William Lane Craig acts like this is a new argument. But you go back like to the original euthyphro dialogue, they aren't talking about commands. They're talking about the nature of the gods. Is what is good because it's good because it's in the nature of the gods to love it, or do they love it because it's good? So I mean, this is the original framing of the euthyphro dilemma, and you haven't solved it just by saying that it's God's nature, that God, this is the way God is.
Yeah, that's good. Very high IQ comment there, Ryan. Let's actually, I would like to move into teacher mode for just a second, because I want to just draw out what the moves are here. The euthyphro dilemma, as we talk about it now, as it regards divine command theory, is asking, well, is something good because God commands it, or is God commanding because it's good? And then if you say that it's good because God commands it, which is the only live move to make as a divine command theorist, you end up facing the problem that God's commands end up just being completely arbitrary. Because they're completely arbitrary, they could be otherwise. They're contingent. This is a way to try to escape the contingency, right? To say, no, it's not contingent, it's not arbitrary, we don't have to worry about a God that would praise the Grand Inquisitor, because we can rest assured that God's moral nature is fixed and constant. But you don't think that works, Ryan?
No, I don't think that doesn't answer the problem whatsoever. No.
Why not? Well, actually, I mean,
what's that?
I mean, given that Ben prefaced this in his opening remarks,
Yeah.
I would be shocked if Dr. Burgess didn't explain the problem with this move.
Yeah.
Now.
So let's let him do it.
Yeah. Forrest, are you there?
Did we put Forrest in the cage too?
Oh no!
Oh, God.
What are we gonna do if Forrest doesn't press play?
Okay, there we go.
Christians want to conform themselves to the way God is.
So, but again, if you say that God can't be other than he is, because God has eternally had this character, and it would be inconsistent for God not to have the character that he has, I don't really see how any of that makes it any harder to imagine a alternate world where, hey, maybe you don't want to call him God anymore because because at this point the being that we're imagining, maybe part of the necessary condition for counting as God is that he has that moral character. Fine, call him Shmad, right? So where Shmad exists, and Shmad is like God in every single way, except that his moral character is different. Instead of being steadfast, he's capricious. Instead of being, kind, he's cruel. And the question is, would that mean that those, in that world, would it be the case that cruelty was good because this happened to be the character of the being that created everything? And if not, why doesn't that mean that what counts as a morally good quality, a morally bad quality, a morally good character, a morally bad character, is independent of what character God has?
Right. I would say that what you're trying to do is you're asking me to visualize as a thought experiment something that I can't get my brain around. I can't imagine. If you're saying, imagine a world in which...
Of course he can't. Low IQ.
It's impossible for me. So you're asking me to imagine a world in which all the squares were circular, and I can't do it.
Well, I mean, first of all, I think, hey, Descartes was a believing Christian. He managed it. I think you should try. I think you should believe in yourself and try indeed to imagine it. I think you'll be able to imagine it. There's certainly.
It's interesting that he's saying You can't imagine. It's just trying to imagine God as capricious or cruel or whatever is just as hard as imagining circles being square. It's interesting for a couple of reasons. One, because he does imagine God being cruel.
Mm-hmm.
He imagines and endorses a lot of that cruelty.
He just did in his earlier examples. He imagined God being cruel. Yeah, he did not find that difficult.
And then two, the reason that you can't imagine square circles is because square circles are logically incoherent. There's a logical contradiction in the notion. But the notion of a God who is evil, it's not clearly logically incoherent.
Unless you want to say that morality involves some sort of logical contradiction, you can do a kind of Kantian move and ground morality that way. But then you don't need God to explain morality; you just need logic to explain morality, which is exactly what Kant was trying to. Kant, as a religious person, tried to explain morality just by appealing to the contradictory nature of immoral rules.
Good high IQ move there, Kant.
Yeah, very very high IQ, very high IQ. Not like this guy.
Let's play.
There's certainly nothing logically inconsistent about saying that you have a world that was created and is ruled over by a being whose essential nature is to be.
No, because what you're asking me to do is deny an essential attribute of deity. So if you're asking me to defend the Christian God by imagining that he's finite.
Well, I mean, all I'm asking you to do, I'm not asking you to revise your view of how God actually is. All I'm asking you to do is presumably what you set out to do in your 3 points, which is to say, accept for the sake of argument something that you don't believe and see what follows from it. So that's what you're doing when you imagine that there is no God. You accept my presuppositions for the sake of argument. And that's also what you'd be doing if you imagined this thought experiment, and you say,
this is very high IQ.
Rather than me being right, that there is neither a kind and loving God nor a cruel, omnipotent demon, or you being right, about there being a kind and loving God. I'm just asking you to temporarily accept and think about and see what follows from a third possible presupposition, which is that the world was created and is ruled by a all-powerful but cruel and capricious demon. And you're telling me that it's impossible, but I'm not really hearing a good reason why it is impossible.
Okay.
I'm not imagining.
I will give you this one.
Okay.
I'll go this far with you. Okay. For the sake of this discussion, as the Apostle Paul would say, I'm out of my mind to talk this way, but okay, all right, you've talked me into it. God is the infinite, all-powerful, omnipotent fiend. Okay, if that's the way the universe is, and you take your stand defying this ultimate power, like you postulated doing, I can say that given that cosmos, that rebellion of yours would be incoherent.
How would it be incoherent?
What?
You'd have no reason for it.
Okay.
God!
Wow.
Yeah.
You'd have no reason for it. Notice that he can't imagine. You can say you'd have no self-interested reason for it. He can't imagine any other kind of reason than that. If there's not a self-interested reason to do it, in his view, there is no reason. He just can't get beyond that conflating morality with self-interest thing.
It seems to me, I don't see where else there is to go in this. Like once you get to a point in the debate when you recognize that the person, your interlocutor, holds this kind of position, like you don't have any common ground to appeal to convince them otherwise. I mean, maybe this is high IQ.
to just say something so absurd that your opponent has no recourse to continue to engage with you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Huh.
That's
Let's
pretty high IQ.
Well, the point, I mean, the end goal of this debate isn't to convince him that there is no God or that he should be an atheist. He's never going to be convinced of that. So the point of the debate, obviously, is to convince people watching that might hold those positions and that might be sympathetic to it, that your position is the correct one. So in the end, I mean, also just, you know, to look like to look good at debating, to bring people into your work. So at that point, I mean, the best strategy might be just to let him kind of get more and more ridiculous to the point.
Let him keep taking himself. Yeah, I mean, I have to imagine, and obviously I'm biased here, but I have to imagine that anyone who was like on the fence about this and was really following the conversation would just have to see how Wilson is getting destroyed here.
Well, I want to see how Ben responds here. What do you do when the person you're arguing with gives you everything you could possibly want in a debate like this?
Let's see.
Well, I have no self-interested reason for it, but I think ordinarily we think that moral reasons are deeply and profoundly different than self-interested reasons.
But what reason can you point to? What reason? Again, what would you? What would you point to?
Yeah, like a moral reason is a reason that you're doing something because it's morally right. You're not doing something because you're morally wrong. So Kant, for example, would say that an action has moral worth precisely to the extent that it is not motivated by self-interest. Now he thinks it has to be motivated by respect for the
theme God would say, what do you, God would say to you,
I'd say that
why are you listening to Kant? I killed him.
Well, I think that I would say that
okay, well, stop. I'm being convinced though.
That he's not.
This is a really high IQ move, and I'm eating apples, but I can't let that lie uncommented on. God killed Kant.
Yeah.
So why are we listening to Kant?
Why are we listening to Kant? Kant lost.
This is a great argument. And it's something I'm going to steal in the future. I think my philosophy work gets like somebody points out, like, well, that argument's kind of been undermined by the works of Nietzsche or whoever.
But Nietzsche's dead. God killed him. Why are you appealing to that guy?
If Nietzsche's so smart, why did God kill Nietzsche but not me?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you could always go with the Nietzsche killed God. Like, you know what I mean? Like, God's dead, so like, I don't know. Can he really be right in this situation either?
Well, I mean, but Nietzsche's clearly dead, so he's not right.
Maybe nothing is right.
Only the arguments of living people are worth considering. That's what you have to take from this. Kant's dead. I'm not going to listen to his morality.
I want to see how he works his way out of how he wraps this up. But it does seem that if we follow his logic, whether we go along with his theistic view or not, we are kind of left with the conclusion that we can only pay attention to the works of living authors.
Yes, I think that's right.
Puts the Bible in a weird spot.
It does.
It also puts defending the Confederacy in a weird spot.
It does, yeah. It does, yeah.
Well, that's why you need someone like Doug Wilson to make these Confederate arguments anew.
Mm-hmm.
Can we just imagine give them a Confederate argument podcast, like somewhere in the world there's like this podcast, but like it's a Confederate, like a Southern version of it.
That'd be great.
Oh God.
Ben, work on your accent.
Yeah.
A very clear thinker, because he's confusing two different issues. The demon is asking me what self-interested reason that I have. I'm talking about moral reasons, and moral reasons begin precisely where self-interested reasons end. That's why, like Plato in the Republic, he's asking people to consider, to figure out what they really think is morally just, to imagine a ring of invisibility so you could do whatever you wanted and get away with it. Says, what would you not do because you think it's morally wrong?
Very high IQ to bring up Plato here, like I did earlier.
Out the issue of what you're going to be
so morally
rewarded.
My question is morally wrong. Morally wrong by what standard? By what standard?
Morally wrong by the standards of objectively correct morality, which again, I think there are arguments for all the options that I've given for objectively correct morality. Now, if you don't find it,
a mortgage is basically a special kind of loan. It's much longer in term than many other loans. Often
low IQ.
If you say no, I think that all of those options are wrong. I think that maybe there's a deep philosophical problem with making sense of the very thought of objective morality. Then all I would say to you is, okay, but if that's true, if there is this big problem with how to make sense of the idea of morality being objective, adding on, well, God exists to your set of assumptions is going to do exactly nothing to alleviate that problem.
Why not?
Well, we talked about the euthyphro objection earlier, but the point, but really, I think that if you're going to say that it does something, the burden of proof is on you, and all you've told me, right, with all this business about Stalin on his deathbed and all of that stuff, is about that not doing what God says is going to go badly for you, which, look, I'm an atheist. I believe that not doing what Stalin said in Stalin's Russia was going to go badly for you. That doesn't mean that I don't admire, Trotsky and other dissidents. That doesn't mean that I do admire people who went along to get along. And similarly, I'd say on the cosmic scale. So all you've given me is a reason to think that it would be, if God exists, it would be in your interest to agree with God about morality. But that's a completely
that's just my third
from an argument for God's beliefs about morality being objectively correct.
I do agree with you that I argued that motivation matters. And I do agree that self-interest, Jesus said to fear the one who can throw both body and soul into hell. So it's not wrong to take self-interest into account. But that was my third point. My second point has to do with the rationale. When you say things like it's objectively immoral to obey this ultimate demoniac God, it's objectively immoral to obey the demon who created all things. My question to you is why? By what standard is it immoral?
And again, I've given you the answer to that several times. So I think here are your options that you can think any of these moral theories, if any of them is right, then, that's demon God, Stalin, the Grand Inquisitor are objectively wrong because they're violated. If you don't think any of them are right and you're worried that moral nihilism is true, you haven't given me a single reason to think that theism is going to be the basis of any sort of anti-nihilistic argument. You've just pointed to the existence of a philosophical problem and asserted that in some way or another that we have yet to hear, theism is going to help solve that problem.
Now, you're introducing God into the system as though he's simply a big character in the play, instead of the ground of all being, the one in whom we live and move and have our being. Because when you introduce God, the necessary absolute, and into the equation, then nihilism is out.
Why?
Because God says it's out.
Okay, well, that might be a good reason that it wouldn't be in your interest to be a nihilist, but you haven't explained why that means that it would actually be objectively incorrect to be a nihilist. You've said God is the ground of all being. If that includes God being the ground of all morality, then this is just a different way of saying, well, divine command ethics is true. So if God exists, we can make sense of divine command ethics being true, and that's the right answer to the question of what's objectively morally good.
No,
but
because
I could pose all the same questions about that you were posing for utilitarianism and Kantianism and all those other options. I could say, well, wait a second, why morally, again, if we're talking about what's actually true as opposed to talking about what it's in your interest to believe, if you know what's good for you, and if we're talking about what's actually true, I should say, okay, let's assume that God exists. Why is doing what he says is what's morally right the right answer, and utilitarianism and Kantianism and all of these other things?
This is my third point.
And you
remember
haven't given me
my 3 points. My 3 points were the existence of the Christian God provides us with the definition of morality. The second is it provides us with the rationale.
But I want to linger on that first point, because nothing about the existence of a Christian God logically entails that divine command ethics is right and utilitarianism and Kantianism and the rest of those are wrong. It could be that the Christian God exists, and of course God, being all-knowing, knows all of the moral truths, and maybe even a good way of discovering the moral truths is to read God's word or ask for God's guidance. But what those moral truths are moral truths that are defined by the categorical imperative or defined by well-being. You haven't given me any reason to think that's not true, except the one time when you seem to be giving me a reason to think that it wasn't true was when you said, well, if God if God, in his belief that certain things are morally right and morally wrong, is believing in moral facts that aren't defined by him, that means that he's submitting to someone or something outside of himself. But that argument is questioned.
I do want to return to Doug in just a second so that he has plenty of time to respond as well, just because I think that he was on the verge, he was starting to make a point, and then you jumped in, and so
we're about out of time, James.
We're close. For the Q&A to fit in as well, what I want to do is maybe give Doug a chance to respond, and then pretty quick, I pardon my interruption there, Ben, but just because I do want to respect your guys' time.
Okay. So basically, coming to the first point, the Christian position is that God's nature and character, by definition, is everything. It's not, the universe is not a place where God fits in. The universe is created, spoken into existence by him. He's not only the source of all our physical being, he is also the word. He is the source and ground of bedrock of every definition. So when we define what righteousness is, basically what God says, given the fact that if it's the Christian God exists, then by definition, his will, his character, his nature defines the pattern of what is right and holy. And so consequently, it's not possible to imagine the Christian God where someone has the right to dissent from that definition.
Okay, I'll leave it to the judgment of viewers whether that answers my challenge about what it is conceptually that makes the existence of a all-powerful God who created the universe incompatible with some moral theory other than divine command theory being true, or whether any of that challenges the euthyphro objection to divine command theory.
Yeah, divine commands are not whims. Divine commands proceed from who he is.
Well, the only way for divine commands not to be whims is if they're made morally correct by some moral standard that is independent of the will of God. Just saying that, well, given God's nature, he could only do this. Okay, well, given a cruel and capricious nature, if you're a necessary being, you can only act cruelly and capriciously. But I think we would still say of a universe with a cruel and capricious God that what that God wanted wasn't morally good. So
no, you only say that. You only say that because you're talking
that God's commands are what matters. To say that God's nature is what matters looks like it's responsive to the challenge, but it just recreates it one level back.
No, you're having to live in Descartes' demented universe, and your valiant resistance of the demoniac God in that universe, you're having to borrow moral capital from this universe in order to justify your stand. Because if you, just like fish don't know they're wet. If you lived in that universe, you would have no basis for resisting that.
But you're switching topics because we were talking about moral metaphysics. What is it that makes something morally good or morally bad? What you're talking about is moral epistemology, how we know whether something is morally good or morally bad. Now, I could grant you that it could very well be that in the demon-ruled universe, the demon wouldn't grant us the knowledge of what was morally good and bad, that he might, this was Descartes' original point about the demon, that he's introduced to be a source of ways that we could be wrong about everything. The demon is tricking us, but that's a completely separate question from whether things actually are morally good or morally bad. And I haven't yet gotten a reason to think that the right theory of what makes something morally good or morally bad is divine command ethics rather than Kantianism, Rawlsianism, utilitarianism, any of these other options.
A range of philosophers that you get to pick from is not the standard.
Well, no, but I'm saying that they have that if any one of those, if any one of them are correct, if you accept, if any one of those theories is the correct theory, then, if utilitarianism is the correct theory, then something being morally, something maximizing well-being and minimizing suffering is what makes it objectively correct, even if no one thinks so, even if God doesn't think so, and God exists.
What if they're all?
But if you think,
what if they're all
if you're not convinced by any of the arguments for any of these views, if you think that there is this big problem about how to make sense of morality being anything but a matter of preference, my point is that adding theism into the mix, and this is not simply a matter, I think none of these metaphors about whether God is like a character in a play or God is the ground of all things, adding the assumption that God is the ground of all things into the mix doesn't actually add up to a reason to think that divine command ethics is the right theory of morality. If you want to do that, you still have to make that argument. So just pointing to, there's this philosophical problem about how to make sense of objective morality. Now, I'm not necessarily convinced that is a huge problem, but let's say for the sake of argument that it is, adding theism doesn't make that problem any more tractable.
James, how much time do we have left?
This is a good time to jump into the Q&A if you guys are ready.
Whew. All right. Thank God that is done.
All right, you guys ready to debate homeschool versus public school?
Yeah, let's jump into that.
I'm homeschool.
Yeah. All right. Public school. God says so. God likes public school.
I heard God likes homeschool. I heard God likes charter schools. That's what I heard.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Good point. Why isn't charter schools an option in that debate?
Wilson must be sharp because I do feel legitimately defeated at this point.
Yeah. I'm impressed by Ben's IQ that he still has he's still coherent and can speak in sentences after that barrage.
Instead of making a sophisticated argument, he just used psychic flamethrowers. Didn't work on Ben.
I'm honestly impressed by Ben's patience throughout a lot of these debates.
Yeah, it is. I don't know that I could keep it that together.
Yeah. Probably. Obviously, Ben's not trying to convince Doug Wilson of anything.
Mm-hmm.
He is hoping that he can get some traction with people who are on the fence. That's the whole Ben Burgess shtick.
This one also has a bit of prestige to it because Doug Wilson had those debates with Hitchens.
Mm-hmm.
So there's, I don't know. There's that. I don't think that necessarily Ben would have chosen to debate some random megachurch pastor that that wasn't the case with.
Yeah. So that's the reason that Ben chose to platform Doug Wilson.
Yeah,
Just because
just
of
give him
that.
the platform. Because they never
Give him the giant GTAA platform.
That's our show. Give him a platform.
GTAP.
All right. I don't know. Do you guys want to call it? I don't really see any super chat questions that we've gotten throughout this.
If there are any super chat questions, we're happy to tackle them. Again, this provides food to Ben in his cage. All the super chat money keeps Ben alive.
Yeah, I don't know. Give it a good couple minutes, and then
Right. We can start plugging what we have planned coming up, Mark. For the new GTAA show that now that we own it.
GTA :
IQ/success/alpha $.
Give them an alpha. That's the
Give them an alpha. There you go.
Yeah, so
that's good.
On the show, we're gonna have friend of the show, Sam Harris, on to read the Dr. Seuss books that are racist.
Yeah, his favorite racist Dr. Seuss books. I think we might get special guest Charles Murray on there too, right? We're still working on that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Hopefully, from that starting now, frequent contributor and guest. I'm also taking over Ben's position at Jacobin. Please look forward to my next article. It's called the Smartest Man in the Room. Aren't we lucky he's in control of it?
There's still an editorial process to climb up the ladder to at Jacobin, so you might be disappointed with those ones, unless you have movie streams on the channel, and then you get Micah to come on, and then
there you go.
Kind of.
That's how you do it.
Just slip your pitches in there like Ben does.
Yeah, we've got Dave Rubin lined up, right? We're going to have him on for the next movie Wednesday to talk about V for Vendetta and the parallels between that and
God's Not Dead.
Yeah. Oh yeah, God's Not Dead. Yes. Yeah. That's right.
You gotta watch God's Not Dead before you go watch God's Not Dead 2.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it didn't make any sense.
Yeah.
Starting the Adam Carolla movie stream Wednesdays.
Ben, you got out of the cage. Fuck.
Yeah, it was weird. Right. I was trapped in a cage somehow. I don't know how that happened. But thank God I'm out here. I'm talking to my friends.
What's up, man? How you doing?
Could God construct a cage so powerful that even he couldn't break out of it?
Mm-hmm. Good question.
Is that one of the God's Not Dead sequels?
Yeah.
God's not dead, but he's in a cage.
Yeah. God's Not Dead 5, not dead harder.
Ben, I want to ask you about your experience in this debate. Were you,
how much of a hit did your IQ take after that debate?
Did you measure your score before and after?
I don't know. But I've been binging 2.5 Men on Hulu since I did. It's really good to me.
Yeah,
that's a problem. I did see you on Twitter saying that Mad Men was the second best TV show of all time after The Sopranos.
Yeah.
IQ.
This is a really good super chat question. The answer is no.
Yeah, that's correct. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is interesting when so I heard earlier, I've been kind of in and out. I took the dog for a walk. I was playing cards with Jen. So
I did all that in your cage?
Wow. Yeah. No, it's a big cage.
Yeah.
But I was there when you were talking about when you quoted the Wikipedia thing about slavery. And of course, I'm sure a Wilson apologist would point out that you didn't get to the land later when he says, yeah, but even despite the fact that it was so awesome, still it was wrong for some reason.
Oh, well, okay then.
Which, as far as I can tell, is his position that, like, because he sort of says, well, slavery was bad and unbiblical, although.
Yeah. Although still kind of awesome.
And so that was actually my one big disappointment in the debate, that he didn't rise to debate on any of the slavery or Robert E. Lee comments.
Yeah, that would have been fantastic.
But
it was a very, very good move trying to draw him into that. But
I didn't actually see the what I heard on your podcast. There's a bit in the Q&A when they ask if
about the kill slate of the Canaanites.
No, about if who was it? If very bad person confessed. And
That if Stalin had a deathbed confession, he'd be in heaven, and if Alan Turing didn't, he's in hell.
And Doug Wilson was just like offhandedly, no, that's right.
No, he didn't seem to recognize that as a bullet to bite. Like the genocide of the Canaanites, there was a little bit more of a song and dance. Like he kind of realized that this wasn't going to play well. And then he, but of course he said it's fine, because it's God. Mm-hmm. So, which really actually was my one, other than him not rising to the debate of the slavery stuff, that was my one big regret in all this, that I didn't like press the genocide thing. I mean, I kind of made one comment about how if you find yourself defending genocide, that's a bad sign. But I think that really should have been like 5 minutes of like,
yeah, seriously.
If you find yourself defending genocide, that's a bad sign.
Forrest sounds just like someone who went to grad school.
Which friend is that, man? I think I might know what you're referring to. Oh boy.
Yeah.
Well, good job, Ben. Very high IQ performance.
Thanks.
Yeah, I guess if you're not going to get back in your cage, we'll.
Yeah, well, I can't really go back in the cage. I'm actually supposed to go on Katie Halper in like 10 minutes. So
okay.
Please do consider making this vaguely IDW-ish IQ success grift show. I think there's a lot more money in for you.
Yeah, much more successful, and therefore higher IQ. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
To answer Oliver's question, that's correct. That as can't play the Simpsons clip for get a copyright strike, but I believe the form of this argument is, if Kant's so smart, why is he dead?
Mm-hmm. It's a good point.
I like that. I like that argument.
Yeah.
No, it is really like that. Actually, is legitimately interesting. That, I mean, assuming that he means it all. I tend to assume that, that you're going to make this point. I mean, it's the same thing for William Lane Craig. The last time, if you're going to make this, I'm trying to remember who I stole this line from, but Josh Blanchard said this to me on Twitter. That it's you really it really seems like you must have had to kill the part of yourself that sees a distinction between moral interest reasons and self-interested reasons.
Yeah, but it's really striking in this debate, how obstinate he was to just somehow obtuse. He just could not see the distinction. You explained it to him so many times, and he just kept going back to the friend of the deathbed example. Amazing.
It really is a powerful philosophical move, though, when you just go around biting bullets, because it gives your opponent no point of leverage, right? And that's why Ben clearly lost this debate.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yep.
Yeah, no, can't argue with that. But yeah, no, I mean it is amazing because like it really is. I mean, it really is like the South Park thing, with like Eric Cartman, being like, "Oh, but we're not going to get punished." And
Yes.
like, no, but we feel bad. It's like, but I don't understand. Why do you feel bad? We're not going to get punished.
Yeah.
And Cartman, Eric, we feel bad for other people.
Mm-hmm.
Like this sort of basic failure to compute. That it's like, no, moral reasons are about your interest in other people. They're not about how how you treat them is going to affect you.
Yeah, exactly.
It also just kind of like it makes sense at that point why like Bush administration era conservatives were just so willing to accept the Patriot Act and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Because like it's like the same eye in the sky philosophy.
Do you see how beautiful this poster has been, by the way, for the new? This is your new poster for your show.
Oh my God, this is going to be like, I'm not going to have to be like all these hours that I'd normally be on YouTube every week, all the running around, lining up guests, all the like, all the like texting back and forth about clips. Like, I mean, I can finally watch Deadwood. Like, they're trying to get me to do that for like 10 years.
Oh
like,
God, yes.
Wait, have you not watched Deadwood?
No,
there were a couple times when like you were over at mine and Aaron's old place, and you'd stick it on at like 4 a.m. when we were drunk, and so I have a vague, hazy recollection of a couple scenes. But I've never watched it.
I think I tried to get you started out once in Atlanta too, but the same kind of thing. It was late and you were falling asleep. But yeah, we've got to do that. That's such a good show.
My point is going to be, I'm going to be so much happier now that you guys are taking over the show.
Yeah.
Me too.
Yeah.
I've wanted some direction in my life, some reason to get up in the morning, and I think this might be it.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. That's right.
Well, that'll be the next Patreon episode. The beginning.
Next Patreon episode, yeah. With Sam, also with Sam Harris.
A brief history of phrenology with some suggestions
about how to reshape your skull for greater success.
Yeah. No, the I mean, like you'll need that sound drop that Michael always did of Sam Harris saying, "We can't talk about Neanderthal DNA anymore." Like obviously there'll need to be a new intro song that samples that, like not in the spirit of making fun of it, but just
Well, I'm pretty sure that episode of TMBS when they first got that sound drop was the one that I started working for them. I'm like pretty because it was the episode that the first episode I clipped was the one that where they had where Michael called into like an actual he called into like a professor of neurology or something that was like really actually studying the IQ thing, and he talked about like whether the bell curve was pseudoscience, and I remember like sitting there being like, "Oh shit!" I really walked into it.
I can distinctly remember riding my bike and listening to that episode because they were talking about Harris and Ezra Klein, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And just laughing their ass off.
God, that debate was something else.
I mean, my favorite part of it was and the whole thing was just like Klein. I mean, God bless him. Normally not my favorite person, but like he made a heroic attempt in that debate.
He really did.
Klein tried to argue about the substance of it, and Harris like complaining about the fact that we're not allowed to talk about stuff like this.
Yes. Yeah. That's my recollection. Most of Harris's debate was like, I keep getting called racist for saying this stuff. Why can't I say this stuff? Like,
and he also said at one point, Harris did, because Clyde made, I thought, a fairly insightful point about how Harris was identifying with Murray out of like, tribalism. It was like, it was like a, identity politics, but his group is like people who get like are at the center of these controversies. And Harris actually said, no, it's not identity politics. It's just reflecting my experiences.
Yeah.
So,
Lived experience.
Reflecting my lived experiences. Yeah, that's right. Yes, I remember that. This could be we could break down that debate. Sometime.
No, actually, that'll be fun. We should do that sometime. But the best part of it is, so they're talking about the Flynn effect, which is this empirical result. And actually, the guy who discovered this was fascinating. He was like an old socialist. He's somebody who's academically trained in philosophy, but ended up making these hugely important contributions to empirical psychology. And he just died, like, I don't know, a couple of weeks ago or something. But within the last couple of months.
And why are we listening to him? He's dead.
Yeah, fair enough. But this debate happened when he was still alive, so his opinions counted for something. And and so the Flynn effect is this finding that intelligence increases intergenerationally. And there's a whole fascinating thing about, why that is. It doesn't seem to be, like there's a genetic explanation unless you're like a Lamarckian about genetics. So, what's going on there. And having, societies, increasingly sophisticated, information that people are accessing, all that stuff. Anyway, Klein brought it up. In the purpose of saying, well, look, this shows how malleable this stuff is. That this isn't, this clearly isn't as innate as you think it is. In fact, it's entirely possible, that look for, if there is a racial difference, for all we know, it goes in the other direction, and it's,
yes, I love that point. Yeah.
And which Harris just would not, like he projected that a priori. And the best part about it is Harris tells him that he's misinterpreted the Flynn effect. And Klein says, literally, well, I was talking to Flynn on the phone last week, and and Harris just is not moved by it whatsoever.
Yeah.
Really nice. I got all that secondhand from Michael Brooks. I didn't listen to the podcast or anything like that, but when I listened to Klein and Harris going back and forth, I felt myself want to engage intellectually with the points that Harris would make, wrestling with, okay, well, that's stupid, but how am I going to take it apart? And instead, Michael Brooks would just laugh and laugh.
Yeah.
Such a more effective response. Just fucking dork. No, totally, yeah. I mean, one of my favorite. So, I'm a big fan of Sam Cedar's mini debates with libertarian callers. In fact, pick a long one and do it for this sometime. But one of my favorites of them is 15 minutes long. It's called Sam Cedar debates anarcho-capitalist or something like that. And there's a nice picture of. That they put on the thumbnail of Immortan Joe from Fury Road, on it. And the best thing about it is Sam heroically struggling past, and it's not even that he's struggling past, it's that he's very effectively using and playing off against the various ways that both Michael and Jamie are trying to fuck the whole thing up, which are opposite ways, right? But there's a point early on when the caller who calls himself an anarcho-capitalist, that Jamie Peck is oh, you can't say anarchist, that's our word, that's a left-wing thing, whatever. And then the caller is starting to argue with Jamie, and Sam's no, it's okay, I agree with you, that's fine, let's keep going, and then there are all these points where Michael just starts laughing his ass off in the background, and Sam's and the caller's what does he do? And Sam's no, I agree, it's very disrespectful, but let's keep going.
Sam Harris would be a lot more likable. I mean, less despicable if he was the reverse. If he was genuinely scientifically sound and a white supremacist, if he was just the data just doesn't. Imagine he's with Richard Spencer, and he's just Richard, I would love to live in a society where I never had to listen to rap music or see basketball again. Okay, that is my normative preference. But if you look at what Nisbet is saying about IQ, the data isn't there. This doesn't account for the Flynn effect. We need to be prepared for the worst case scenario. Okay, let's say disaster. IQ, it's been mapped, and Black people are not only athletically superior, they're also intellectually and morally superior. Okay, they're better at solving math problems. What then? Does that mean our commitment to a white ethno state is any less valid? Of course not. We need to be prepared for these contingencies.
Oh my God, that's good.
It's amazing because it's not just that it's a pretty decent Harris impersonation. He really has a good lock on like Harris's rhetorical move, like the kind of stance that he likes to strike. He's really got his number.
No, totally. Yeah. I mean, he's spent a lot of time, clearly the joke shows you that he has spent a lot of time thinking about Harris's argument. He gets the structure of it, or else the joke wouldn't work. It's one of those like typical, like Michael Brooks things that's like very very immediately and viscerally funny, even though the joke is working on like 5 levels, like the Nation of Islam Obama.
Yeah. Oh God, good stuff.
Still remember him saying the Neanderthal doing anything and saying, "And I shouldn't be punished for saying that."
Awesome.
All right, you guys ready to wrap it up?
Yeah. That is, by the way, just on what for like that is like one of the most annoying things about like capital T, capital D, the discourse in 2021, that like 95% of it now is like just meta discourse about who has a right to say what, rather than like discussion of the content of it, because like all of the shitty, lazy, left things where people, do the like, oh, cancel culture doesn't exist, whatever, they're all like, look, you're complaining about criticism. I'm allowed to criticize you. And then like all of the, like the Sam Harris's of the world, it's like, they could barely be bothered to like, even like engage with the question of like, whether any of the insane things they said is correct, like it's all this meta stuff about their right to say it.
Okay, but it's a little bit weird to hear you complain about meta discourse when we just spent 10 minutes talking about Michael Brooks having an argument with. I'm sorry, Michael Brooks talking about having an argument with Hezekiah. Not to mention the fact
we just spent
2 hours watching us talk about.
Yes. Your podcast is literally having people on to talk about what you talked about in previous episodes.
You should get an OnlyFans because we're all watching you masturbate right now.
Look,
who are we gonna? I want to know, who are you gonna have on?
I promise you that on the next episode, when I make Forrest play this clip of us talking right now, I'm going to explain why some forms of meta discourse are okay and some of them are annoying.
I want to know who you're going to have on to break down our breakdown of your debate.
Okay, but the real question about all this is that could God create a take so hot that it would just kind of cancel out the discourse? Can God get canceled? That's the...
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's what Thus Spake Zarathustra is about.
Yeah.
That's and also one of my favorite sequences in The Good Place when Chidi when Chidi finds out again about the afterlife. He has he's told about all of that and he loses it and he has like his shirt off and he's and his
peeps in the chili.
Yeah, the pizza and there's this thing where he's like out on like the quad in his university, and some guy's trying to sell him drugs, and he grabs into him, and he starts like long form quoting the Spake Zarathustra at him. All right.
So then you've got Katie Halper now.
Yeah. I have Kitty Halper. It was originally going to be 9:15. She texted again, said 9:30, but we should get off.
Very good. Yeah, I'd like to, if we have 5 minutes to talk, the three of us, about totally unrelated topics.
Yeah.
The secret shit that YouTube fucks can't know about.
Wait, oh, you want to have a conversation off air is what you're saying.
Mark out.
All right, guys. Thaddeus Russell's on the episode on Monday. Going to talk about postmodernism and other things. On Wednesday, Ryan Forrest and possible fourth guest to be announced. Mike Racine wanted to do it, but the time didn't end up working out. We'll be talking about Cape Fear. And on Friday, I'm going to be talking with Jed about the Ship of Theseus and personal identity puzzles. And on Sunday, Brent Lingle and Rob Larson are going to be on, and we're going to be breaking down Destiny's debate with Michael Albert. Really appreciate everybody for watching this deeply ridiculous exercise, but I got a kick out of it tonight. Thank you for coming on,
fun.
Ryan, and
thanks for letting us hijack your show for an evening. It was fun.
Yeah, for sure. All right, Ben out.